Welcome to EPG Pathshala. Today we'll talk about facets of discourse. The term discourse has got different meanings. When we talk about discourse, the commonsensical meaning of discourse is something that goes beyond the level of sentence. Discourse has got multifaceted structure. When we're talking about discourse, the discourse has very important ingredient there is the context. Imagine a sentence when you tell your father, "Dad, don't you understand what I have been telling you? Why do you always commit this mistake? Can't you behave yourself properly?" Now what happens here? You have uttered this sentence to your father. But imagine, have you uttered anything which is grammatically a mistake there? Or is it something which is not appropriate? You should not have said such thing to your father. Why? Because the culture to which you represent, the culture background that you have does not permit you to use this sentence because it's a sentence which is embedded in the context. The discourse is actually language use. How do you use language? The knowledge of grammar, the knowledge of vocabulary, these are essential part. We have to understand these things. But when we talk about discourse, the discourse has to be embedded in the context. When we are talking about language, language is not just what you know about the vocabulary, the way you use it, the grammar which has to be correct, the rules that you have to follow. Yes, you have to follow these things, but there is an appropriacy in which the society's norms are also used for uttering a sentence. Discourse is talking about that. So today in this lesson, in this module, we'll talk about the different definitions of discourse. What we'll talk about how people have looked at discourse. Discourse from a purely linguistic point of view, discourse that is going beyond the level, beyond the structure of a language. Then we'll talk about what is important in discourse is the context. What are the different types of context in which we understand? Discourse is a social practice. And when we talk about social practice, lot of other things that come into play. For example, your background, the power structure in which you are living. We will discuss all those things. Now, the moment we talk about discourse as going beyond the level of a sentence, then the sentences have to be brought together to bring some kind of a unity. The unity that in linguistics we are talking about cohesion. Not only cohesion in terms of a structure, but cohesion that is there as one part, and then you have a coherence, that is the way you understand, the way you interpret things. All these things will come together. So in this lesson, we'll talk about all these aspects which are important to understand the facets of discourse. Under the influence of Chomsky, the Chomsky linguistics has looked at language and analyzed it without taking into account, in fact, the context of use. This decontextualization approach to sentence analysis means analysis at an intrasentential level based on the knowledge of grammar and vocabulary. But knowing a language is not just limited to knowing how rules of language work. Along with this knowledge of grammar and vocabulary, knowledge of how to participate in conversation and how meaning is arrived at in its contexts of use above the level of sentence are equally important. Both study of language in its context of use and above the level of a sentence provide a basis for defining a discourse. The discourse has different meanings in different disciplines and thus embodies post-structural notion of plurality with no fixity of meaning. Its varied meaning in a variety of disciplines such as linguistics, sociology, psychology, philosophy, critical theory, and many other fields has often left the term undefined. Its usage in a general sense was simply a common sense knowledge from everyday language use, For instance, public and political speeches, when we are referred to as discourse of, say, J. Krishnamurti, or a discourse of capitalism, or a discourse of globalization. Here, the term discourse in a more restricted sense has been used to refer to expressing a particular set of ideas. This use of discourse in its restricted sense refers to a type of specialized knowledge, and there is a particular social group that engages itself in the use of language to articulate this specialized knowledge. Another commonsensical definition of discourse is when it is considered as a unit of language larger than a sentence. It revolves around the syntagmatic relations, that is, order and sequences, and is governed by the cohesive devices in language, for example, anaphora and cataphora. Yet, another way of looking at discourse is to go beyond such common sense definitions, to look at language as a social practice, to treat discourse as ruled by the conditions of its production and reception, and as constituting a distinctive socio-cultural practice that is institutionalized to a greater or lesser degree. To understand the range of meaning associated with the term, let us consider a variety of definitions of discourse available in literature. I will not go into the details of the dictionary meaning of discourse, which has been looked at: verbal communication or talk or conversation or formal treatment of a subject, or conversation especially of a formal nature, or formal and orderly expression of ideas in speech, etc. We will look at the discourse from the point of view of scholarly definitions given by some linguists. For example, Stubbs provides a good definition of discourse, which is a starting point, which he describes in terms of three elements: study of authentic language. He places the notion of authentic language in opposition to invented language. Authentic language is naturally occurring speech or written texts, such as conversations, interviews, commentaries, and speeches. The second thing is study of language above the level of sentence. Here, the focus has been on units of language which are larger than sentences, both in terms of size and scope. Thirdly, he talks about study of language in context. It is premised on the assumption that meaning is largely governed by the context in which texts occur. What is significant in Stubbs' definition of discourse is the distinction that he makes or maintains between abstract theoretical construct and pragmatic realization. For him, it is the latter, that is the pragmatic realization, that forms the domain of discourse. According to him, discourse is the contextualized and situational use of language, rather than language in the domains of abstraction, away from its socio-cultural milieu. This specific understanding of discourse juxtaposes it with those concerns of linguistic approaches that attempt to study language purely in terms of the product of mind. In fact, the classic Chomskyan linguistics contravened all the three characterizations outlined by Stubbs. Sarah Mills has also deliberated upon the notion of discourse, where she draws the attention of the reader to the often fuzzy and confusing meaning the term evokes for different people. She emphasized that the understanding of discourse is inflected by socio-historical factors, and therefore it has a number of possible interpretations based on the intellectual and academic context, sociology, linguistics, critical theory, etc., in which the term is brought to use. Shiffrin's definition is interesting because this definition has taken into categorization of discourse in three groups: discourse as language above the level of sentence. This definition of discourse is consistent with the formalist or structuralist paradigm which Zelig-Harris considered as the next level in a hierarchy of morphemes, clauses, and sentences. So in this hierarchy, You have got morphemes, you've got clauses, you've got sentences, and you've got discourse. Way back in 1952, for the first time, Harris discussed it in his paper with the same title, although discourse analysis as a general and influential approach to language emerged in the early 70s. This structural-based definition allows linguistic analysis of constituents in a text that have particular relationship with one another. This relationship we have already discussed in terms of cohesion and in the module number 22, which dealt with cohesion. Discourse as language use. This is the second aspect of Shiffrin. This definition of discourse draws insights from the functionalist paradigm to view it as a system through which particular functions are realized. Functional-based definition does not allow analysis which is independent of purposes and functions of language in social, cultural context. Fairclough's views that language and society constitute one another marks an extreme position of the functionalist paradigm. The third aspect in Shiffrin's definition is discourse as utterance. It considers discourse above other units of language and suggests that it does not arise as a collection of deconceptualized units of language structure, rather as a collection of inherently contextualized units of language use. When we are talking about discourse and we are talking about something which is beyond the level of sentences, then there is definitely going to be certain aspects which are important to connect the different levels, different structures that are there beyond the level of a sentence. When these things, they are to be connected by certain devices. Cohesion brings this unity through certain cohesive devices, and at this point, the notion of discourse marker assumes significance. We have already mentioned that conjunction is one of the types of cohesive devices in the framework provided by Halliday and Hassan. By using certain linguistic elements, conjunction connects clauses and establishes implicit relations between them. The kinds of relations established by conjunctions are additive, adversative, temporal, and causal. These connective forms help the addressees to construct the mental representation of the text. We have already touched upon these cohesive devices in detail in our module on cohesion. The term discourse marker originated in Shiffrin's classic work in 1987 on how connectives, and I quote it, on how connectives function not just as cohesive devices but also as coherence devices, which establish relations in all levels of discourse between what is said, meant, and done. Quote closed. Discourse markers are sequentially dependent elements that bracket units of talk, where the units are defined only through their role in discourse. Examples of discourse markers are connectives, for example, and, but, or, particles, oh, well, adverbs, now, then, and lexicalized phrases, I mean, you know, as well. There is a multiplicity or non-exclusivity in the relationship between the forms of discourse markers and their functions. This means that the functions of discourse markers are relative to the form and content of both prior and upcoming discourse. There is every possibility that more than one function can be performed by a single discourse marker. Even meanings and relationships in more than one discursive component can be conveyed by a single discourse marker. For instance, in addition to signaling new events in the sense of adding or linking timeline events in children's narratives in the sense of temporality, and which is an additive, can also signal various relations ranging from contrast to expansion to elaboration. Its occurrence at the beginning of paragraphs serves as filler that covers up the hesitation of the narrator before a new segment. Lexicalized phrases such as I mean, you know, as well, not only serve to establish involvement and create rapport between the participants, but also signal the attitudes of the addresser to the addressee regarding what is talked about. There is a relationship between text and discourse. Both have been talked about by different researchers in different academic culture contexts, and both have been viewed differently. In the German and Central European context, a distinction is made between text and discourse, which relate to the tradition in text linguistics and rhetoric. Text analysis focuses on the structure of written language as found in such texts as essays, notices, road signs, and chapters. In the English-speaking world, however, though discourse is mostly used for both written and oral texts, this definition of discourse based on distinction between spoken language and written language has, however, not been found very satisfactory. In the absence of any clear-cut distinction between the spoken and the written language, many scholars proposed that text and discourse can be used in a much broader sense to include all language units with a definable communicative function, wherein text is seen simply as a message coded in its auditory or visual medium, and discourse as performing an interpersonal activity whose form is determined by its social purpose. Discourse as a social practice. Many social theorists support the view that discourse is a social practice, which is integrated within the social bodies and structures. Wodak proposes a definition of discourse which agrees with the principles of critical discourse analysis. The critical discourse analysis sees discourse as the use of language in speech and writing as a form of social practice. Such description provides a reference on the dialectical relation between a discursive outcome and the context, either social or political. The event is affected by these surroundings, but it also affects them. Hence, discourse affects the social structures, knowledge, identities, and relationships and contributes in shaping them, although it is affected by these surroundings. So, discourse can play a role in maintaining the status quo in a society in a way that contributes to changing it. Guy, in 1999, makes an alternative distinction between discourse with a capitalized D and discourse with a small d. Discourse with a small d refers to language in use or stretches of language such as stories or conversations, while discourse with a capital D is defined as different ways in which we humans integrate language and non-language substance, such as different ways of thinking, acting, interacting, valuing, tools, etc. This association of language with other stuff can be used, again Guy says, to identify oneself as a member of a socially meaningful group or social network. Now therein comes the notion of power and ideology. Discourse and notion of power and ideology is being looked at by philosophers and social theorists who have broadened the meaning of discourse or the plural discourses to encompass what is said and written or even what is not said. They link these expressive manifestations to the immediate social context or situation and thus takes such much broader social and cultural historical context within which language and its immediate contexts are embedded. Since the notion of discourse is approached by various scholars from their own epistemological and disciplinary perspectives, it is very interesting and difficult also to reduce the meaning of discourse into one entity. Foucault, a French philosopher, has rightly observed, and I quote him, instead of gradually reducing the rather fluctuating meaning of the word discourse, I believe I have in fact added to its meaning, treating it sometimes as the general domain of all statements, sometimes as an individualizable groups of statements, and sometimes as a regulated practice that accounts for a number of statements. This is what Foucault says in 1972. Multiplicity of meaning and frequent interchangeability of definitions can also be seen in other discourse theorists' writings. For example, Bakhtin, a Russian literary theorist, for whom discourse is sometimes used to signify either a voice or a method of using words which presumes authority. This broader understanding of discourse is well articulated in critical discourse analysis, which will be discussed in Module 28. Norman Fairclough, one of the foremost CDS scholars, combines Foucauldian perspective and Hallidian systemic functional linguistics approach to discourse analysis, and views discourse as not just language use, but as a form of social practice, shaped by relations of power and invested with ideologies. Social practice comes on account of dialectical relationship between a particular discursive event and social structures, institutions, and situations, where both the former and the latter contribute towards shaping each other. This dialectical relationship makes discourse socially constitutive as well as socially conditioned. When we say that discourse is socially constitutive, we not only mean that it constitutes situations, objects of knowledge, and social identities between people and groups, but also helps in sustaining, reproducing, and transforming the social status quo. Fairclough further argues that any production of text is not simply a transparent mapping of structure and content. Rather, each structure creates, manifests, and maintains domination and inequality among people and groups of people. Notions of power and ideology come from the socially constitutive aspect of discourse. Discursive practices can help produce and reproduce unequal power relations in terms of language, class, ethnicity, and gender. Discourse has been classified in many different ways. Based on the spoken written text distinction, a discourse can be a spoken or written text. Based on the participation of a speaker or writer, a discourse can be monologic or dialogic. When one speaker or writer produces an entire discourse with little or no interaction with the other participants, the discourse is said to be monologic. Dialogic discourse, on the other hand, occurs when two or more participants interact and to varying degrees construct the discourse together. It is multiparity in nature. Based on the degree of preparedness, a discourse can be planned or unplanned. Planned discourse includes prepared speeches, talks, or sermons. The unplanned discourse includes, at the spoken level, most conversations, and at the written level, informal notes, letters, etc. Based on the immediacy of context, a discourse can be context embedded or context reduced. Everyday interactions that occur in familiar situations, whether spoken or written, example shopping lists, ads, etc., are context embedded discourse. Here the interlocutors rely heavily on social convention and contextual information. In context reduced discourse, most instances of written discourse and some examples of spoken discourse are removed from the immediate physical context for arriving at a meaning. Here, the interlocutors rely heavily on their knowledge of language code and genre types. Context-reduced discourse is characteristic of literate spoken and written text. Unplanned discourse is mostly context-dependent, while planned discourse is often context-reduced or decontextualized. Further, both planned context-reduced and unplanned context-independent discourses can be handled by educated and proficient language users with flexibility and appropriacy. Based on the purpose of interaction, a discourse can be transactional or interactional. In case of transactional discourse, there is only a transmission of information, like the way goods and services are exchanged. The interactional discourse involves those instances of language use that not only shape and maintain social relations and identities, but also in attitudes of a speaker-writer towards the topic or the interlocutors. We'll be saying that the context is very important in the study of discourse. Whatever we say and do, speak or write, context and background knowledge of the world surrounding the discourse are important for discourse analysis. For instance, silence can convey different messages depending upon differences in the context of its use. But context has generally been given a rather simplistic view. It is most often been uncritically assumed as an objective and unchanging dimension of the text, which is believed to be easily accessible to a reader. Although context has a crucial role to play in discourse analysis, even those analysts working from the critical discourse perspective have often used it merely as a background for analysis. According to some critiques of this practice, such as Guy Blomet, discourse analysis must include all aspects of context: material, mental, social, institutional, historical, etc. Some of these contextual elements can be physically present and thus can be seen and analyzed. But there are some which do not have a material existence. They are in the mind and thus cannot be seen. Mental contexts require far more systematic analysis of all those contextual elements and social circumstances which have been responsible for occurrence of an utterance in a particular situation. Equally important in the study of context is the notion of shared knowledge. No communication can take place if there is no common context of shared knowledge. There are different types of context that can be included for understanding verbal and non-verbal environment of speech. These can be linguistic context or co-text. Text takes place in a broader environment called context and co-text. Context and co-text is a linguistic environmental surrounding the words of a text. Context of situation, non-verbal immediate environment of speech. Context of culture, general non-verbal permanent environment of speech including background cultural knowledge, and extra situational context. Look at the following example. A. My daughter is very nice. She only speaks when spoken to. She is generally very quiet. B. Yes, I know. I wish my daughter also behaved like this. What do you think the two men are trying to do? Do you see their desire to control their daughter's behavior? Do you see them extolling the virtues of being quiet, praising the culture of silence? If we are not able to see a discourse of patriarchy in the above dialogue between two men, we perhaps need an orientation in critical reading. In drama as well as in real life, it is not difficult to find characters who speak only when spoken to. The speech of such characters, when analyzed in a piece of drama using either Birmingham model or any other framework, it would be slotted mostly under responding move. Birmingham model looks at it under the responding move slot. This has been discussed in the module on Sinclair and Coulthard's model and the analysis of drama dialogue. They may occur rarely in the initiating move. Such characters may be seen as accepting the domination of others. We may also notice that certain characters tend to make initiation and take longer turns. They may be seen as more dominating than others. So students, you must have seen that when we are talking about discourse, we are talking about discourse as something which is larger than a sentence. And when there is something which is larger than a sentence, then we have to see how the sentences are connected with each other. We have to bring the notion of cohesion there because the text has to be tied together. We talked about the cohesion in our lesson. We said that the cohesion, there are certain cohesive devices that connect the sentences together. And these cohesive devices are the binding forces that bring the two sentences or the three sentences that are there in a discourse. They are all giving you a meaningful unit. But we have also said the discourse has been understood in a multiple ways. The multiple ways also prompt us to see that the scholars representing different epistemological tradition, they also look at discourse from their own perspective. For example, when somebody just remains silent, we cannot ignore the silence as something which is a non-verbal speech. The silence has been there on account of what has gone beyond the position to which the interlocutor represents. He's silent because he's representing a culture where the silence is being admired. He represents a culture where the silence is expected of him because he cannot question someone. Now, these are the varying understandings of the silence. Now, if silence is ignored, the silence does not constitute any part of a spoken or a written text, but the silence carries a meaning with it. The discourse has to be understood from the point of view of the language use. So when we are talking about language use, the language use is embedded in a context. And you must have observed that in whatever perspective that we take, whatever the understanding that we have of a discourse, what is most important is the notion of context. It is the context that gives you information about how the discourse, the utterance is located in a particular socio-cultural, historical context. This is what we have understood as part of the different facets of discourse. We have also tried to analyze and classify different contexts. We have also seen that when we are talking about discourse, we also make a distinction between a discourse and the text. Why do we make a distinction? Because it could be spoken, it could be written. Now, we also seen that the text and the discourse, they have to be looked at as something which is planned, unplanned, something which is where you are embedding in the context, you are reducing the context. All these facets have been understood in this module. So students, I am sure you must have understood by now that how important it is to understand the discourse. The discourse is something that is to be looked at in a more presentable way, the way we have talked about it. I am sure you will have no problems in applying it in your day-to-day existence also, because at every moment of your existence, you are performing meaning, you are giving meaning to it. And that is where you should understand that there is a discourse there. So now I end my presentation today with you all. Thank you.